Thank you. I am one of the grad assistants, and I graduated in 2018 with Quentin for Lazelle University's Solstice Masters of Fine Arts and Creative Writing program. Welcome to the 7th in a series of 8 evening readings taking place here in Auburn, Mass. as part of our 2024 10-day residency. And how are we? Already only have one reading left. How are we there? But we are. So as we open this physical and virtual space, I would like to note that we acknowledge that the territory on which Lazelle University stands is that of the Pawtucket and the Massachusetts people. Lazelle's campus is a place to honor and respect the history and continued efforts of the Native and Indigenous community leaders who make up Eastern Massachusetts and the surrounding area. This statement is one small step in acknowledging the history that brought us to reside on this land and to help us seek understanding of our place within that history. Ownership of land itself is a colonial concept. Many tribes have seasonal relationships with the land we currently inhabit. Today, Newton and Auburndale are still home to Indigenous peoples, including the Nipmuc Nations and the Massachusetts people. For more information, please visit the Massachusetts Center for Native American Awareness and the Commission on Indian Affairs of the state of Massachusetts. And now, for tonight's reading. First up, we have our guest faculty, Jerel Dye, introduced by Assistant Provost Ken Calhoun, Then guest faculty, Shalene Gupta, who will be introduced by alumni Lisa Allen. Then guest faculty, Richard Hoffman, introduced by alumni Cassie Robico. And we will conclude with Steve Huff, who will be introduced by alumni Jason Christie. And Ken, can you come up to the mic?
Hey, this is pretty cool. A lot of people in here. I'm really glad to be here. Usually I'm sitting in an office about 100 feet from here. So it's so easy just to come on over. We should do it more often. All right. So I'm pleased to introduce your first reader tonight. That's illustrator Jerel Dye. His incredible work, which can be found in mini comics and graphic novels like Pigs Don't Fly and Einstein, which I saw is available right over there, and I'm going to get one as soon as we're out of here today, as well as an inspiring Instagram account, is both technically dazzling and full of heart. There's a recurring interest in sci-fi scenarios, images of spacecraft and robots that are loaded with captivating detail, rendered with loose hand-drawn charm. Which isn't to say the images aren't precise. They are somehow both precise and playful. His drawings have personality, and dare I say, in these AI-infiltrated times, the work is distinctly human. I'm spellbound by these images, which bring me back to the days of staring, sometimes for hours, at the covers of Isaac Asimov's science fiction magazine, 70s and 80s sci-fi flavored album covers, cereal boxes, and of course, comics. The Tintin books come to mind for the dynamic storyboarding. And then there's wacky packages and weird wheel stickers. I don't know if anyone remembers those. Mad Magazine, Robert Crumb, and my favorite, Maurice Sendak. What these illustrators have in common with Jerel is a sense of humor and a fascination with the visual rendering of the human predicament. And we know that many of those artists deployed a rather caustic wit. Jerel's work is warmer and more affectionate. There's a kindness to it that I think stems from wonder. To look at his work is to witness someone highly skilled at play. And this sense of play is contagious. Whether he is offering cinematic panels depicting Einstein's era or the human and machine interactions in a galaxy far, far away, the images are transportive in their power and their prompts for storytelling and dreams. And it's my honor to introduce Jerel Dye.
Yeah.
Hi. So I am here to present with you some comics that I make. Reading comics to a group is a weird kind of experience It's not the typical comics reading experience. Mostly we read comics alone in our rooms, or under our blankets. There's a lot of different ways to read comics. In front of a room where I'm reading the dialogue is rather unusual. So this is going to be a little bit of a strange experience for me. Bear with me a little bit. I'm going to do some voices, which I'm not great at, but I'm going to try. Yeah. So if we could get the projector going, is it already going? I'll see that now. All right. So these are some covers of some of my comics. I spent a long time crafting perfecting my craft doing mini comics, which are small, handheld one-sit reads. So I'm going to present with you one of these comics that I've done, and then we're going to take a look at some of the pages that I did for Einstein, and I'm going to do some reading of that. Okay, so here's the first book I'm going to share with you. It's called The Cycle. It's an accordion comic. So it actually unfolds, right, like this, and you can read it like that. You can read it like this, and then you flip and you go to the back and you read it on this side. So I prepared this short video to try to read it and kind of reenact the experience of reading a long, wide comic like that. And hang on, I think this is going to take another second to make sure I'm on the right thing. Here we go. Oh, I just feel a little touch of green really brightens up a dome. What do you think, here or over by the entrance? I can't believe it. Wonderful. It's like a whole new space. And it'll just grow like this, no maintenance. That's what they say. Gorgeous. What will they think of next? It says here that we're releasing something new this year. You and your big sexy brain, come here. Unbelievable. Check the data again. This rate of growth is astounding. This will change everything. This is completely irresponsible. They're playing with fire. What have you done? Look out. Those mad fools have doomed us all. And for what? If we can make it there, we might be able to wait this out. Shh. Look, the mutations seem to have jumped across species. My God, the lizards, they can fly. And that's the cycle. So next up is going to be some Einstein. I'm moving that closer. So this scene from Einstein. So Einstein was written by Jim Ottaviani, who's a very experienced comics writer. He writes a lot of science books and biographies of scientists. So he's very well versed. He actually was a nuclear physicist before he became a comics writer. So he's got some experience in the game. The colors for this book were also a collaboration. I worked with Allison Acton, who did all the colors. So I did all of the drawings and the line work. For this scene, this is toward the latter end of the book. It takes place at the 1927 and 1930 Solvay Conference after Einstein had become world famous with his theory of general relativity. Einstein and Niels Bohr had been building a deep friendship through physics leading up to this event, although they were known to frequently argue in a good-natured way, especially relating to quantum theory. So this is a little heavier than my first one. Okay. Except there will never be a finally for Einstein when it comes to quantum theory or relativity, I suppose. But that was perhaps the only time, and almost certainly the last time, he ever said wonderful and quantum in the same sentence. At the Solvay Conference of 1927 and 1930, he took his last public stand on quanta. Now he was no longer the revolutionary, bold youth seeking approval. Sorry. Einstein, it has been too long. Niels, so very good to Einstein, Albert checking in. Yes, sir, I know. All the Solvay conferences were memorable, of course. Next, please. For the 1927 conference, Einstein, Bohr, Heisenberg, Schrödinger, and de Broglie were just a start. Madam Curie, so very good to have you with us again. Will your daughter be joining us? Thank you, and no, not this year. But Einstein, P.A.M. Dirac, physicist, predicted the existence of antimatter. Experiment causality, Arthur H. Compton, physicist, demonstrated the particle nature of light. Probability, Paul Ehrenfest, physicist, friend to both Bohr and Einstein. In Copenhagen, we have a good stay, Professor Planck. It is good to see you again, Professor Lawrence. Next, please. And those are just the best known of the Nobel Prize winners who came to discuss photons and electrons. The main event was really Einstein v. Bohr. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and the matrix mechanics he employed were just the latest thing. And quantum theory, the boundary between the object of the observer can be pushed further and further in the direction of the observer. Boundary, observer. Why are we even talking about this? From the point of view of the quantum theory, knowledge of the actual is by its nature always incomplete. I agree with this conclusion. All these probabilities you require mean quantum mechanics must not be complete. Between these probabilities and the subjectivity introduced by the notion of an observer has anything to do with whether you see wave-like or particle-like behavior in any given experiment. Do you truly believe, if I may, Werner, Einstein, in the end, what matters is we have wave-like behavior and we see particle-like behavior, and which we see depends on our experimental arrangement. The two behaviors are not mutually exclusive, except in the classical sense. The new situation we have is waves and particles are complementary, and the uncertainty principle is natural in this context. Outcomes depending on observers, no objective reality. I ask you, this is natural? But relativity gave us a new way to relate the experience between the two observers, yes? So now we find ourselves on the very path taken by you towards deepening our knowledge of the laws of nature. Or shorter, we already have relativity theory from Einstein, now from Copenhagen. We have complementarity theory. Real sorcerer's multiplication table. It's ingenious and great complexity sufficiently protects it against disproof. But an inner voice tells me that this is not yet the real thing. Every day they dance this dance. Lectures, arguments, and then at breakfast, Einstein, often along with Schrödinger, would present a new objection to Bohr. My Gedanken experiment is this. I have been around enough to know Einstein's thought experiments were not meant to help the quantum fellows. No, yes, I see, you, we are in a very difficult position. I don't understand what precisely is the point you want to make. No doubt this is my fault. Well, it'll be all right. And it was. Always by dinner, Bohr and his young colleagues would have an answer to Einstein's objection, which didn't stop at Einstein and Schrödinger from trying again. Like I said, we are in a very difficult position. What is your repeated itself every day? This is my fault. Oh, well, of the conference. Until Einstein, well, he didn't exactly give up. Fine. His soothing philosophy, or is it religion, of yours is so cleverly concocted. For the present, it offers believers a soft pillow from which you can't be chased away. I'll let you rest there. Souvenir. Many of these same scientists returned for the 1930 Solvay conference on magnetism. Ostensibly, it might as well have been titled Einstein's Last Stand. 3 more years of discoveries and experiments and successes of quantum theory made his opposition less tenable. But he still caused the architects of the Copenhagen interpretation to sweat one more time. So, my Gedanken experiment is this. We start with a box. A shutter covers a hole in its side, and the shutter is controlled by a clock. Fill the box with photons. particles, not waves, if you please, and then weigh the whole apparatus. Now have the clock open the shutter and let out a single photon. What if we now weigh the box again and subtract the total mass after the shutter opened from our initial measurement? We get a single photon's mass, yes? And you will remember E equals mc squared? Yes. So we know its mass, we know its precise energy too, and we know the precise time it had that energy thanks to the clock. One of your uncertainty relationships states that there are limits on what we can know about a particle's energy and the time in which it changed. Equation, if I am not mistaken. And yet here, one can clearly know both. No uncertainty. Dinner's served soon, Professor. It's in the other room. It was quite a shock for Bohr. He didn't see the solution at once. During the whole evening, he was extremely unhappy. Werner Heisenberg, concerned. It can't be true. Marie Curie, sympathetic. He must be wrong. P.A.M. Dirac, bemused. It is the end of physics if he's right. Wolfgang Pauli, amused as always. Einstein. 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 For Bohr and Heisenberg, that night passed both slowly and too quickly. Complementarity in action. Einstein. The next morning, Einstein. Perhaps we can talk about relativity. Curved space, inconsistent time. You have shown that when anything, a clock in a box, for instance, moves through a gravitational field that affects how time passes in the box. Now, if we change the weight of the box by releasing a photon, the spring accelerates the box upward. Upward through a gravitational field. But outside the box, we observers don't move relative to the field. But again, because the clock inside the box does not move, time passes differently inside. Uh-oh. This introduces an uncertainty as to how long the clock box system took to rebalance and how long the box took to move upward against gravity before you can measure its new weight. So using the principles of relativity, we now can show that the equation must be h, Planck's constant, verdammt. And that was that. Uncertainty proved by relativity.
Hi, everybody. To introduce a writer who researches as deeply as Shalene Gupta did for her most recent book, The Cycle, Confronting the Pain of Periods and PMDD, I thought I should probably do at least a little bit of research of my own. A quick search told me that The Cycle is Shalene's second book, having co-authored The Power of Trust, How Companies Build It, Lose It, Regain It, and that she has bylines in publications as diverse as The Atlantic, ESPN, Harvard Business Review, and Time. I knew from reading The Cycle that Shalene taught English in Malaysia on a Fulbright scholarship, but I didn't know she wrote a book documenting the history of the Malaysian Fulbright program. In the past, she's been a financial specialist for the Department of Treasury, a reporter for Fortune, and a researcher at Harvard Business School. To me, though, the most interesting thing I learned about Shalene is that in May of 2016, she read an essay titled The Three Things My Mother Never Told Me About in Boston's Listen to Your Mother show. What starts with a funny story about a rite of teenage girlhood, shaving your legs, seamlessly moves into a poignant lesson about both language and not marrying someone who doesn't understand you, and then to her mother's deeply personal experience of surviving the Indonesian mass killings of 1965. In this 5-minute and 56-second essay, Shalene accomplishes what the best creative nonfiction work aspires to do. She transforms a uniquely personal story to a universal one and tells it in a way that even those with no plausible connection to the particulars of that story can understand, because it's no longer just a story.
It's a witnessing, a revelation, a shared excavation of emotions that we all feel, whether those emotions are love, fear, or something in between. She accomplishes the same in the cycle. But the reason that learning that Shalene was in Listen to Your Mother was most interesting to me, though, is that I was also in Listen to Your Mother that same year in Kansas City. A year later, I was invited to the St. Louis Listen to Your Mother show, where I met Solstice alum Ann Breidenbach, who said to me, "You don't have an MFA? Can I tell you about my program?" And who then encouraged me to apply. So it seems only right that I get to encourage you all to help me in welcoming Shalene Gupta.
Thank you so much for that, Lisa. I feel so thoroughly researched. I thought that Listen to Your Mother was dead and buried, so kind of blushing now. Super props to Jerel for the most creative reading I've ever seen. Seriously. So I wish I had pictures, but as a business journalist, my choices were to read to you about the stock market or my mental illness. I went with my mental illness. You're welcome. This is the intro to my memoir, The Cycle. Shortly after I was diagnosed with premenstrual dysphoric disorder, or PMDD, I was talking to a close friend from high school who has depression and anxiety. "Have you ever had a serious mental health issue?" she asked. And part of me felt insulted. She sounded like she was talking about an exclusive club, and I wanted in. And then I realized I was already in the club and had been a member for a long time. I just hadn't known. "I just found out I had PMDD," I said. "I don't know what that is," my friend said. "Think severe PMS," I said. I could tell my explanation wasn't landing, so I gave her a short description. PMDD means for a few days a month, right before my period, I morph from a quiet, conflict-averse introvert to an implacable storm of anxiety, depression, and rage. I scream. I throw things. I attempt to break up with my partner, and occasionally I attempt suicide. Then, just as suddenly as the storm appears, it vanishes, only to come back the next month. Before I got diagnosed in 2020, I'd never heard of PMDD. Instead, for years, I assumed I was a bad person with poor emotional control. And because of this, I worked hard to hide my episodes. Sometimes my diagnosis still felt made up, as if at any moment a doctor might call me and say, PMDD wasn't real at all, and I was just a disaster, casting about for an excuse to behave badly. "I wouldn't say it's serious," I told my friend, "not compared to what you've gone through." "Honey," my friend said, "I've never been suicidal. I can't believe you deal with this every month." Then she demanded, "How have I never heard about this before? Why didn't I know?" These were the same questions I asked when I was diagnosed. When PMDD was first proposed as an official diagnosis, people frequently conflated it with PMS, the mild irritation and pain some people experience before their periods. This contributed to branding anyone who menstruated as crazy. Because people don't talk about PMDD, we don't understand that a small minority of people can have severe psychiatric symptoms before their period. Because we don't understand this, people with PMDD are not getting the help they need, so they suffer in silence and shame, hiding their symptoms instead of talking about them. And so the silence grows deeper until it's enmeshed in the fabric of society. I wanted to write this book in an attempt to break the silence and my silence, to answer the question too many still ask: what is PMDD and why have I never heard of it before? But deciding to break my silence was easier than actually doing it. As I read about PMDD, I was forced to walk through the dusty chambers of my mind. I yanked stories and half-forgotten moments from chests and cabinets that I'd locked up tight. I dumped them out on the floor and stared at the carnage. There was nothing here that I wanted anyone to see. There was nothing here I wanted to revisit. I had worked for so long to present a calm and collected facade to the world, even if I'd spent the night before attempting suicide or screaming at my boyfriend. Why would I want to tell anyone about the worst moments of my life that caused me the greatest shame? Then I thought about the first person I knew I'd ever spoken to who had also had PMDD, a woman named Joy. When Joy smiled, it looked like the sun was rising in her face. She spoke slowly and softly, taking great care with her words, and she had a habit of ending answers with questions that hooked me in. PMDD riddled Joy's life with anxiety and panic attacks, the kind where you lock yourself in the bathroom and curl up sobbing all day. She saw doctor after doctor, but no one could tell her what's wrong. Her solution was to isolate herself from everyone she knew. She left her husband in 2003 because she didn't want him to deal with her illness. After that, her life was a series of doctor's visits until she was able to get a diagnosis and treatment in 2019. We spoke for 6 hours and we talked about everything. She told me about getting diagnosed as a Black woman. I told her about getting diagnosed as an Asian American woman. We talked about love and breakups and following your dreams. No matter what tangents we went off on, we circled back to PMDD, the disorder that affected our minds, our bodies, and the very shape of our lives. Shortly after her diagnosis and treatment, Joy made a video about her journey with PMDD and shared it on social media. Her ex-husband saw the video and wrote to her. He had never remarried, and they found they were still deeply in love, even though 16 years had passed. When we talked, they'd been reunited for a year. At 46, she was looking forward to starting the rest of her life. Joy wanted to tell her story to as many people as possible. Now that we had been treated and were doing better, she thought we had a duty to help others so they could live their best lives. In the spirit of doing this, I conducted over 100 interviews with researchers, doctors, people with PMDD, and their family members to write this book. For years, I imagined I was alone in my monthly PMDD spirals. I spent many nights wandering through my neighborhood because staying at home meant a screaming battle with my boyfriend. I'd wonder where to go next and what should I do if I got cold or tired. I had friends who would have taken me in, but I didn't think it was fair to make them cope with my monthly messes. Still, as I walked past lit windows and families settling down into their bedtime routines, I felt terribly alone. I wondered what was wrong with me and my life. Month after month, I ended up in the same place, screaming at the person I loved best in the world, shuddering with rage and shame. As I interviewed people for this book, I realized during all those years I had never walked alone. I'd always been part of a family. Perhaps we didn't know each other by name, but in spirit, we lived the same lives. Month after month, we battled our minds to stay alive. We fought to make our way through storms in the hope that another better day would come. For some of us, better came and stayed. But for many, better vanished with the waxing and waning of our cycles. For few of us, the next day did not come at all. Still, we endured as best as we could. This is our story. I have written it for the people who ride the storm of their emotions every month, but do not know what is happening or why. For the people who love them regardless, and for Joy.
Wow. Sorry, Richard. It's going to be hard to read after that. Okay. What did I write? Hey, everyone. When Meg asked me to introduce Richard Hoffman, I was immediately reminded of his beautiful yet harrowing memoir, Half the House. I had read it some 3 or 4 years ago, but I still remembered it as having one of, if not the best first lines of any memoir I've ever had read to date. Quote, "It all depends on how deep your brothers are buried," my father said, end quote. That line is the beginning of 218 pages of literary brilliance, the brilliance we all aspire to as writers. Richard's paragraphs sing, his imagery leaps off the page, landing deep in your soul, leaving you slightly exhausted, but satisfied and hopeful. And if it's possible to match language to the realities of the world, Richard Hoffman's poetry does just that. Here's an example from his collection, People Once Real. Vaccine. What is the word for the way the starling sheen and the carapace of the Japanese beetle seem alike? And if I find it, will the dying stop? Words don't come easily to me. I used to think they were afraid of me. They hid in my chest, in my belly. Will the right ones make the dying stop? What is the word, the way some words unsaid erase you? For a hope not to hurt again. For what to say to make the dying stop? In a world where books are banned and voices silenced, Richard Hoffman's writing reminds us why our words are important. Words that entertain, words that embrace, and sometimes, especially these days, words that bring justice. Richard Hoffman is the author of 5 books of poetry, 2 memoirs, a collection of stories, and a collection of essays. His book, Gold Star Road, won the Barrow Street Press Poetry Prize and the Sheila Martin Book Award from the New England Poetry Club. Noon Until Night received the 2018 Massachusetts Book Award for Poetry. The accolades for his 2 celebrated memoirs are way too long to list. Richard is emeritus writer in residence at Emerson College and nonfiction editor at Solstice, a magazine of diverse voices. Now here's where I'm going to add a tidbit that many of you might not know about Richard. Sorry. As a child, Richard Hoffman wanted to be the first American pope to be elected into the Baseball Hall of Fame of Cooperstown, New York. Well, he's not a pope, at least I don't think so. And we're not the Baseball Hall of Fame. But there have been a few times now where Richard has been called in late in the game to pinch hit. Yes. And I think I can speak for everyone who has either been in his workshop or taken his class. He always hits it out of the park. Yeah. Please give him a warm welcome.
Wow, that's about as generous an introduction, more generous than I've ever gotten. Thank you, Kathy. It's been great to be here. I have switched up this set list here for my reading several times because of conversations that I've been having with people in class and in the workshop and at lunch and at the student readings this afternoon. And I want to give it up one more time. That was really remarkable. So one of the things I thought to do was to start with, I always start with a poem by another poet. And because this is a short reading, it'll be a short poem. I found this in the PN Review, which is an English poetry journal out of Manchester. It's called Ordinary Rain, and it's by a poet named Wayne Hill. There's a total solar eclipse here every day. We call it night because we have small names for ordinary things. My God, what we could call the rain. Yeah, in the workshop, we were talking a great deal about language and how poems, according to Mallarmé, who was replying to Edgar Degas, who said, I got all these great ideas for poems, and I don't know, what am I doing wrong? And Mallarmé said, my dear Edgar, poems are not made of ideas, they're made of words. Anyway, I want to begin with a poem that I wrote for my students. It's called Messengers. And it begins with an epigraph from the Greek tragic poet Aeschylus from his Agamemnon. The house itself, if it had a voice, would speak out clearly. As for me, I speak to those who understand. If they fail, memories are nothing. We say what we know because we must. You can cheer us or run us out of town. It's nothing at first, like rain on dust, a hairline crack in the fault line's crust, a tentative first-person plural pronoun. We say what we know because we must recall, recount, redeem, and readjust all that we've known, not for renown. It's nothing at first, like rain on dust, or the first few tiny flecks of rust on barrels buried underground. We say what we know because we must talk back to histories we do not trust, relearn our own and set them down. It's nothing at first, like rain on dust. What does it mean to fear what's just? You can cheer us or run us out of town. We say what we know because we must. It's nothing at first, like rain on dust. So I'm going to send this one out to Eric. In class, we were talking a great deal about, or some about empire and colonialism and the big footprint of global capitalism and empire. And this is a poem about that. It's called Here He Comes. Here he comes with his muscle, his stick, his whistle and shtick, his halberd, harquebus, crucifix and mace, his beads and rumors, strong convictions, his night goggles and self-portraiture. He has a job for you, your death and other talking points, and your mob is no problemo with their Maynard G. Krebs tinfoil hearts, their scavenging and too late willowy midnight moonrise, not with his eyelashes and bibliography. Oh no, nor his businesslike perversions and his ticket to the counterfeit, his seedless fruits and hydroponics, along with his loud Confederates, their threatened flash and aftermath, his end game begun in utero, so suddenly carnal in nomine domini, you can't believe your eyes. This is a poem from my friend, the Palestinian poet Mossab Abu Toha, who I became friends with when he was in Cambridge for a couple of years, and met his family and et cetera. And then he went back to Gaza. And soon after that, there was a terrible assault in 2021 in which 1,000 or more people died, along with schoolmates and friends of Mossab's children. Mossab then came in 2022 for the Massachusetts Poetry Festival and stayed with Kathy and me for a few days. And now is safe, having crossed at Rafah and into Egypt. And then Syracuse University reeled him in with a fellowship, and through somehow the family's back here. And he's witnessing from here. But this is called Gaza aftermath, and I have to explain that this aftermath is not aftermath of what's going on now. It's the aftermath of that earlier assault in 2021, which, among other things, gives the lie to the narrative that this all began on October 7, 2023. That's a mouthful of explanation. Gaza aftermath. Shout not, yeah, not kill, but come on, hella money. Fires in the streets, drones in the air, a love poem speared and flapping on a crooked pike of rebar. Death, listen, for your own good, stop consorting with murderers. It gives the wrong impression. We owe you after all, and all of us are good for it. Before the first door opened with old designs, the story of it all was right there in the book. How fear becomes hatred if you read it right. I used to think we are here to help one another, believe all this is real and sometimes beautiful. I only think that sometimes now. Which words at least won't make things worse? Which stars are stars and which surveillance satellites? Remember, there are two sides to every dollar. An elegy claws its way up grief's hoarse throat, a dirge that could fracture your rib cage, calling to a world where such singing might make sense. In the rubble, a child's remains are unearthed right there, dead center in our future. And a photo goes viral as in vain we mumble ancient poems. The weight of dread is no lighter when shared. Barbed wire rusts, but razor wire just gleams. You can change a map. A calendar is different. Okay, I'm going to switch gears entirely here because there's one poem I would like to read that I'm not going to be able to find it. Is that true? Now here it is. Cassie referred to that first memoir, which, among other things, is about the loss of two of my brothers to muscular dystrophy. One of them, my brother Bobby, was he and I were a year apart. We were growing up together, fighting and playing and doing all those things like brothers do a year apart, when he got sick at about age 8. And so our lives really went in very different directions, and he died at the age of 21. For various reasons, he's really come back into my consciousness, and I think it has to do with spending time with two of my grandchildren who are a year apart and always together. So it stirred up a lot for me, and this is called This Close, and I'll just end with this. Little brother, I have forgotten our secret, but I remember your cupped hand and steamy breath in my ear. I believe you are near, adjacent my 5 hungry senses, with me as if in the spaces between my fingers, between the letters of my name, between the numbers of my years, in sounds too high for ears, too low for even foot soles. Sometimes I can almost see you, shadow of a helpless fish in the curl of a breaking wave, or hear you like halyards clinking on wobbling masts in a foggy harbor. And recently, the grieving animal I am cooked up your likeness in a dream. You, recognizably you, but nothing like the way I remember you. Your round face intent upon surviving. I never wonder who you might have become. Never think of you as almost. Rather as weightless counterweight, an abstract afterward, ungone, a visitor from nowhere. You are where all the waters go, where I take myself to soothe myself, to find a way to understand your absence, how aging, I grew into it, grew onto it like a trellis. Is it your death or mine or ours or everyone's? I am moving through the whole length of this life you left so early. Thanks so much, everybody.
That was great. All the readers great. And a second shout out to the students earlier today. But and a shout out because LaSalle Solstice at LaSalle is in great hands right now. And that the readers, the students owe a great deal to Meg, to Q, to the great faculty. That brings me joy. All right, so I'm going to tell a story about my Appalachian grandmother, and I love her. I'm proud of her, and I'm actually from Appalachia. And then I'm just going to leave it hanging there, kind of like these strange balloons, and it's going to work well for what I have to say about Steve Huff. My grandmother was one of those people with an ear for music. I don't know if you've ever known anybody who had that ability or seen it, but she could sit down at a piano or with a banjo or a guitar and hit a couple licks on it and play whatever it was that you wanted to hear, and it was neat. It was a really special talent that didn't come from being taught. It was just innate. Now, moving on to Steve. Steve has a lot of accomplishments, and the first story of Steve's that I recall is when he was in a little Zoom box and he told us he was raised by wolves. And I was going along there for a while. I mean, oh, interesting. And wait a minute, I don't know about that, but his books of poetry include More Daring Escapes, The Water We Came From, and A Fire in the Hill. His fiction, A Pig in Paris, Blissful and Other Stories, available over here, and The Burning Door. Recently, he has done sort of like a travelogue, a study of great literary figures that are buried in upstate New York, surrounding upstate New York. It's called Resting Among Us. And he told me that people have been more enthusiastic really about this book than any other. And I said, well, how's that, Steve? He said, well, you see, Jason, for years now, people have been dying to get in that book. Steve is also a former publisher and managing editor at BOA Editions Limited, founder of Tiger Bark Press, and most recently, like right now, he is doing an e-newsletter called The Movable Marquee, Notes on Classic Cinema. Comes out bi-weekly. Check it out. So I've read a lot of Steve's work, and it's a little bit crazy sometimes. Some of the things that happen, for example, people get sucked out of airplanes, lost in the mountains with guns and other people's pets. They have like drunken bar patrons pull a doctor out of their house to settle a bet about bullet wounds with an x-ray. And then there's Dory, while making love is struck by a lightning bolt that passes through her and leaves poor Alfieri dead underneath. But what makes Steve's writing special is not that these extreme things happen. It's that these extreme things happen, and then he leaves believable, likable characters at the end with their dignity and a smile on my face when I read it. And even knowing the skill that goes in and being sort of spoiled by the ability to read like a writer, there's still stories that I'm happy to read over and again. And I'm sure we'll hear something good tonight because Steve, like my grandmother, has one of those innate gifts, and it has to do with stories. If it's sitting around a picnic table, trading jokes, or publishing, editing, poetry, fiction, travelogues, Steve can do it. So let's welcome him, Steven Huff.
Writers are always hanging out their dirty laundry. You know. Thank you, Jason, for that generous and funny introduction. And thank you, Meg and Clinton and Temple and Noah for everything. I'm going to read part of a chapter from my novel in progress called Jamboree Road. And this is from chapter 7. What happens prior to this? Jude is a boy in his early teens. His mother and he escaped from their house near Pittsburgh to get away from Egan, her abusive live-in lover. She told him they were going to stay with their aunt, Nanny Grace, in Florida, whom he had never heard of. But on the way down, his mother is brutally murdered when they're camping in a state park. Anyway, he has nowhere to go, and he does end up for a time at Nanny Grace's house. And this is them sitting around the table. So how am I related to you? He asked, rolling a soda can in his palms. Nanny Grace had 3 electric fans going in her kitchen, but the air still hung like sacks of hot laundry. Truth is, you're not. Her face was somber, except by marriage, a former marriage. I'm a Black woman, as you may have noticed. Now, honey, you know my door is open to you because you're sitting here right now drinking my Winn-Dixie Cola. But that was one marriage I've done everything in my power to forget. I married your mother's uncle, one of those 6-month hookups, and we were lunk-headed fools, both of us. No offense to you. He was a white Navy man. Who was your daddy? Egan, I guess, he lied. He figured now that lies were the most reliable way to make complicated things simple. He shifted his feet uneasily under the table and he said, I'm sorry to be trouble. No, don't tell me you're sorry. It's no more your fault than the King of Persia. I'm just letting you know the lay of the land here. You understand me? Sure. Sure what? Sure, I understand, he said, though he didn't really. He saw her reading his sullen face, but he felt like a bee's nest and ready to swarm at someone, and he knew that he had to keep from doing that at all costs. I never knew my mother had an uncle. You didn't? She made a snort. Well, he ain't alive no more anyway. He shrugged. So I'm your Aunt Nanny Grace, or your great aunt, or I was. The way you've been talking, you seem to think that Grace is my last name. Well, Nanny Grace is my first and middle name. My last name has gone back to Horton now. She smiled finally. Maybe you understand, and could be you don't. You ever worked? No. Well, yes, around the house and stuff. For your mama? Uh-huh. You don't like to talk much, do you? No. Well, we work around here, Nanny Grace said. We do the Lord's work, and that means everything we do was the Lord's work. He nodded. He wondered what she meant by we. It didn't look like anybody else lived there but her. She folded her hands on the table. If we're doing the Lord's work, then every breath we breathe is the Lord's breath. The white woman sitting in the chair by the kitchen door with an iced tea in her hand winked at him and grinned. He could see the grin was forced, that she wasn't so sure this was going to work out, that maybe she'd have to come back out there in the wee hours when Nanny Grace had kicked his ass out in the moonlight and haul him back into the social services network. Nanny Grace said, somebody gave you a real bad thing to swallow. There's no way I can fix that terrible stuff. Nothing I can do about it except I can give you a place to stay in exchange for chores. Will you do that? He shrugged. The can was empty and he was rolling it on the table now. Can't you give me a yes or no? Look, we've got to get to the place where we know what's what. You've got clothes in that bag, right? He looked at the duffel bag at his feet. Yeah. Okay. And come September, if you're still here, I'm going to shoo you onto the school bus that comes by. She wanted to know what grade he was supposed to start in September, and he told her the 9th. Had he ever been to church? He laughed. No. What kind of marks did he get in school? He said C's. You can read and figure, can't you? I guess. And she said, well, what kind of answer is that? Yes, I can. Nanny Grace twisted in her seat to face the woman by the door. You've got something more you want to tell me? The woman said, I guess a few things. He was short some essential items, but we've picked up some jeans, a couple shirts, a toothbrush and comb. If other things come up that he needs, give us a call. Like I said, we'll cover school expenses and I might be able to arrange a stipend. She handed Nanny Grace her card. The white woman's name was Carla Caroli. She had her initial CK embroidered on her cloth carry bag, and she was from the Florida Department of Children and Families. The North Carolina authorities in Asheville had taken him to the bus on the morning of the previous day, and he was handed a bag with 2 sandwiches and an apple and a ticket to Cocoa, Florida. It was a long ride with a lot of stops and a night layover at a bus station in a little Georgia town, a dark place in an old building with shadowy ceiling fans that made him think of bats and fly tape hanging from an archway. The air was thick and hot. He slept on a bench and a scruffy man poked him with a cane, and he woke and stared into the man's frantic face until the night ticket man came over and told the man to back off. Leave that kid alone. The man turned away without looking at the ticket man. He wore a stocking cap and a heavy jacket despite the heat. On his way out of the station, he dropped a newspaper on the bench a few feet from Jude. 2 faces peered from that folded front page. He looked away. He slept again briefly. When he woke, a few more people were in the station. The paper had crept closer as if someone had picked it up and dropped it again. He could reach it now without getting up from his seat. The faces of Terry and Gifford, or the composite sketches from what he had described to the police, but the artist gave their faces a more wicked, creepier look than he'd seen in them. The accompanying article, 2 Sought and Grisly Murder in Park, supplied uglier details than the police had given him before, that his mother had been crucified, organs had been removed from her, and investigators theorized that part of her may have been cannibalized. Why didn't they do it to him too? The police had wanted to know. Finally, he sobbed with a force that he'd never felt before until the ticket man came over and asked, are you all right, young man? Did that guy come back and do it? Did he? Carla met him at the bus station about 6 o'clock in the afternoon. She was a big girl and she drove them to a McDonald's where she ate 2 chicken club sandwiches and a large order of fries, but she couldn't get Jude to eat much or say much. So she told him about her kids' summer sports. He'll be doing that kind of stuff before long. She drove him to Nanny Grace's place down a sandy side road off of Route 1. It was a stretch of brushland with occasional palms. The few homes on this road were a tumble of misbegotten structures, trailers on blocks with sun-dulled paint. One lay on its side and looked like a crashed bus. These aren't really official roads here, Carla said. These people are squatters. That's what they are. And there aren't many spaces like this left in this part of the state. See, there was this development company called Paris, Florida, and they were going to build a housing project out here. They got a few roads started and then the company went bust. Only one real house ever got built. And then a few people hauled trailers out here, squatters. Your auntie isn't one of them. She's got a real place. Alligators out here? Oh, not too many. You're not scared of them, are you? When he didn't answer, she said, this is Jamboree Road, and a little bit past your auntie's place is Big Bopper Lane. The developers who named these roads were old rockabilly fans. She glanced over at him. I guess those rockers were before your time. It all looked like crap. God, he thought, don't leave me here, please. One mailbox looked like someone had beaten it to death with a ball bat. Nanny Grace's place was on the right, or he hoped it was hers, an oasis of order. He felt a breath of relief when Carla slowed down and turned on her directional. It had started out life as a trailer, but looked like it had ambitions and sprouted extra rooms in haphazard directions, but solid and more inviting. Rundy flowers flirted with the sand, and a white fence divided it from the surrounding scrubland. A blue Ford pickup truck sat in the driveway, and Carla pulled behind it. When they got out of the car, a woman came to the screen door, watched them for half a minute, and then came outside. A black woman. This can't be the place, he thought. This can't be my aunt. But Carla gave her a cheery hello. She was tall and thin and wore red framed glasses attached to a silver chain around her neck. Her dress was a cheap blue, kind of like his grandma would wear if you caught her off guard. Carla got up to go, and Nanny Grace braced her arms on the table to raise herself up and follow her outside. Waving him to come along with her, Carla gave Jude a kiss on his forehead before she got into the car and drove away. He watched the car raise a trail of sandy dust heading back to Route 1. She shook her head and said, people are always kissing somebody. Most of the time it don't mean a blue bottle fly. He knew she was right about that. Mom and Egan kissed, and he guessed that didn't mean shit. They just did it to keep up their stupid show or to convince themselves that they were in love. Grandma would kiss him and then wipe her mouth with a hanky. Egan and Jude used to tell each other, kiss my ass, only when Jude said it, he got a knuckleball in the side of his head, and that sure as hell meant something. I don't kiss nobody anymore, Nanny Grace said. You're sure going to catch something. There's more germs in somebody's mouth than stars in the Milky Way, and that's a scientific fact. The sun was reddening on the horizon. I'll stop there. Thank you. Thank you.
We've had two fantastic readings today. Let's give it up again for the student readers and our readers tonight.